Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Anime Figure Archive. I'm Senpai and today we have a special episode just in time to commemorate the end of the My Dress Up Darling manga. Today we're going to take a look at 2 of my very first Marin Kitagawa scale figures. This episode will be longer because we're going to take a look at both of these figures individually, so if you just want to see one, check the chapters below. I like My Dress Up Darling. I've read it to completion, I think it's super cute, and I've seen the majority of the anime. But I hate Marin Kitagawa, because Senpai is an intellectual, and he understands that Marin is a committee-written, super basic, cliched waifu who panders to her target audience. She's super hot, model quality, big boobs, blonde, punk/gyaru, outgoing but misunderstood, and of course she's a closet otaku who just so happens to like ecchi 18+ stuff and is unabashedly comfortable in dressing up until that exact moment where it's cute to be embarrassed. She likes to flirt with and sexually tease our protag Gojo, who is completely standard and average, other than being artsy, and his love language are acts of services, which of course she understands the sacrifices for, obsesses and fawns over him, and infinitely loves him for that, of which he is unaware. But the real problem with Marin is that Senpai is exactly the audience that Marin panders to. Senpai has a soft spot for, and is very weak against, big titty blonde girls. If you've seen our collection video, you might know that one of Senpai's OG waifus is Sena Kashiwazaki from Haganai, who is a big titty blonde girl. In that same video, or if you've seen other videos on this channel from where our namesake comes from, there's also this big titty blonde girl that is super effective against poor Senpai. On top of that, Senpai is your average artsy guy whose love language is also acts of service. Case in point, this entire channel, which is his Kohai's dream, and now proudly their dream. So yes, Senpai does relate to Gojo, and yes, Senpai is doing everything he can to keep Marin, the current quintessential big boob blonde girl, at a distance. Say no to drugs, kids. And out of all the figures that he has, this core full price figure was the only Marin in the collection, which was purchased for the sole purpose of building out a prize figure collection that you'll see in a future project. So it has been easy to avoid some of Marin's scale figures, such as these, which were Crunchyroll exclusives. So unless you imported them, they had high markups. That is, until 2 Reddit users shared Crunchyroll's warehouse sale and ruined my life. So special shout out to AdKitchen4644 and Sheer Luck. You've broken me. Enabled an addict. Congratulations. And with that, let's start with my most recent pickup. This figure is simply known as Marin Kitagawa, and it is by Aniplex. It is 1/7 scale and came out in Japan in October 2023 for 18,000 yen. Now, this is a Crunchyroll exclusive, which means that they have the distribution rights for America. So the only way to get it from Japan would be to use a proxy, aka a company like AmiAmi is not allowed to distribute to America. Now, back in October 2023, if you were to buy it at the 18,000 yen price point, that converted to $121 US. So you can see that the $170.99 MSRP that Crunchyroll has is quite the markup at almost 50%. For those interested, it is still currently available on Crunchyroll at full MSRP, but I would not buy it. This is the second time this figure had already gone on sale. If it remains in stock, I'm sure it's going to go on sale again. Here's a quick look at my order confirmation where you can see that they already had it marked down to $79.99, which is a great deal. And then I was able to use a discount code on top of that for an additional 15% off, which effectively made this 60.2% off MSRP. $81 total for a scale figure, especially for one that's arguably as plain as this one, does seem like a good deal, but let's unbox this and find out. Here's a quick look at the box, and the dimensions are on screen in the corner. And here is the figure itself, also with dimensions on screen. To start us off, this figure does suffer from a similar issue that the Ruko Matoi had, which is viewing angle is very important. You really do need to be below her eye level in order to appreciate that smile of hers. And here's a quick look at the figure from slightly above. Taking a look at the paint, let's go ahead and start with her hair. This pinkish orange highlight at the bottom of Marin's hair is a must. It is not Marin if she doesn't have this fade at the bottom. I'm pleased to see it here, though at least on the back side I do wish it was darker. But from the front side it does look pretty good where the natural shadows give it a darker tone. Along with the tips of her hair, she does have shading here in the part line. From this angle we can see that her fingernails are painted and her accessories such as her ring do look clean. I do like the face on this figure. Her eye decals are very crisp, set nicely, and she does have blush. Her mouth in particular looks really good. They've painted her lips, and they've added a part line for her teeth. They did a good job painting her earrings. You can see she has an industrial piercing up top. The barbell looks clean, and so too do the studs and the hoop. It's hard to spot sometimes, but it does appear that the shirt itself has shading, as you can see in the armpit right here. It appears they use the technique where they actually spray the white over a darker blue piece of plastic. So where the paint naturally thins, you get a darker area of blue, and thus becomes the shading. The tie is also shaded with bands of darker blue throughout. And once again, you can see that her choker is also clean. Looking at the skirt, the pleats do have shading. You can see highlights at the edge of each pleat. It seems the lines on her skirt are a mix of printed as well as painted sections to join the printed sections together, which you can see on these splotches right here. And here's another area where the lines appear to be joined via paint. Yet another section, but I believe they missed the one down here where you can see the two lines meet but don't quite align, that I think would normally be covered again with a drop of paint. On her left hand, once again, we see another example of clean line work for the jewelry and her nails. Unironically, it was very important to me that they got the color and modeling of her panties right. If she were wearing white panties, this would not be Marin. We know what she wears from the first chapter in the manga and from the first episode of the anime, which has become this iconic scene. Believe it or not, these are used as a storytelling device. They're showing Marin's kind of high fashion side, as well as giving you a glimpse between how innocent Gojo is versus how lewd Marin appears to be. It kind of emphasizes that they're from different worlds. So if I didn't include this, it simply wouldn't be Marin. Going back to the shading though, we are greeted with darker areas here throughout the middle, highlights on the side, and the lace itself fades from lighter in the inside to darker on the outside. This angle is hard to capture, but you can see they even went as far as adding a red bow on front. This is not visible in the manga or the anime, and it's definitely one of those creative freedoms that they've taken that I appreciate. There's no shading on Marin's legs or any skin that's exposed, but we are greeted with shading here on her socks in the middle, and her loafers look good. Here's a close look at her accessory bag that has shading throughout all the creases and the handles themselves. The line and decal work on the pins are really well done. And here's a quick look at the backside. So looking at the paint as a whole, clean is a great way to describe what's here. I'm grateful they added shading where it counts. I do wish they darkened some of the peach highlights that we're supposed to get in her hair. And although in my opinion this is what I expect an average scale to be, that's not always the case, so I do think this is slightly above average, and I'll give it a 4 out of 5. When it comes to the sculpt, modeling, and finish, it's definitely the weaker part of this figure. Now, it doesn't fall apart, but there are just some odd QC issues. This is hard to catch on camera, so I'll show you an enhanced photo on screen. I've got this kind of white crusty stuff on here. Now, it was bridged from here to the edge of this, but I'd already flaked some of it off when I was scraping at it, so I'm confident I can get it off. I just don't know what it is or why it's here. While we're here, the hair does have this piece added back in for some reason, and the hair has the weakest finish of the entire figure. The details here start to soften more than I want them to. These gaps mean the paint doesn't lay down well, so you get these clumps down these ridges. Then we have a number of obvious seams here on top, once again some of those gaps causing paint clumping. So back to being difficult to capture, I do have this odd brown stain up here, and you can see some excess glue and stain on the inside of her collar. I think the sculpt of the wrinkles in her shirt are chosen well and feel natural to me. And the pleats of her skirt are very convincing. I feel like the bag was modeled after a real bag because the wrinkles in this are just that convincing. Of course, though, I can't ignore this cultured angle, which is going to be one of my favorites on this figure. Marin is a skinnier girl, and I do appreciate the representation of her having smaller curves here in the back. It's refreshing to see. I do think the gap between the buttocks might be ever so slightly exaggerated, but I do appreciate the details down the middle. And I do appreciate how the sculpt accentuates these feminine curves as you change your angle when you view the figure. Taking a step back and looking at the sculpt as a whole, the modeling, and taking into account of the weird QC issues, there are areas that I think look great and are slightly above average. But in general, what I see here is what I expect a scale figure to be, so I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Taking a look at the base, the best part about it is that it's not necessary. The balance of this figure is so well done that she can easily stand on her own. I mean, I could even turn her and kind of wiggle her back and forth and she doesn't fall over. But here's your closer look at the actual base. It does utilize metal pegs, which are always nice to see. I do like that it's thin, clear, and has clear elements in the actual design. That way it can blend better in people's setups. Of course, I'd always prefer it to be acrylic. It's not unnecessarily wide. Her feet are almost to the edge, so that's always welcome to see. The resolution of the lace is maybe a tad lower than I'd like it to be, though that's probably more on the print side of that versus the digital creation of this. But I like that overall they took the time to give us something beyond just a basic color. But just like our last category, I feel like this is a very average base and what I expect from an average scale figure. So it's going to get a 3 out of 5. When it comes to artistry, this is quintessential Marin here. Now, I don't think this exact pose and scene is based on something out of the manga or the anime, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But this is most certainly Marin Kitagawa in her school uniform and is representative of how we see her in the first chapter and first episode of the anime. The peace sign pose that she's giving is something she strikes all the time, so that's very much in line with her character. And one of the most Marin things Marin can do is this smile that you see here that I do adore. Hate. But I think this is very hard to actually translate to 3D form. Case in point, in my opinion, the freeing bunny does not do this well. I think this face looks absolutely awful. And although this smile is hard to do anatomically, it is up to designers to create a realistic impression of this in 3D form. For the freeing side, her mouth is almost flat all the way across. And all I see when I look at this is a white banana. Meanwhile, for this Aniplex, you can see that on the edges, her mouth is recessed. Her teeth go back into her mouth like you'd expect them to. They also did a good job with just highlighting the edges of her teeth, which is something we see in anime a lot. So I think this becomes a more natural representation of what we'd expect to see in figure form. As mentioned before, I think these red panties are basically mandatory for Marin when she's wearing her schoolgirl outfit, or we need to change it to something that canonically we see in the manga or anime. As pleased as I am with the design choices they've done here and how they've captured Marin, I'm back to this just being my expectation for any scale figure. So I'll once again give it a 3 out of 5. When it comes to value, if we start with the Crunchyroll pricing, no, $171 does not feel like a good value for this. I know it's priced in line with modern scales, right? Because I expect to pay around $150, $160 base price for the figure itself. But this also is about as simple as a figure can get. If we look at Aniplex and their 18,000 unit price tag back in October 2023, that feels more or less spot on to what I'd expect this figure to cost, which is going to be in that $121 US range. If we compare this to the price that I paid for this, I think $81 is a great value. But I don't want you to get too distracted by that pretty 60% off number. Because remember, Crunchyroll was already marked up by about 40%. I personally value this figure at about $120, so very similar to what the initial Aniplex price is, of which I'd give it an average, 3 out of 5 score. So my $81, especially after like shipping and all that, is a nice bit of savings. But if AmiAmi were to sell this for 18,000 yen originally and it were to sit on the market, I can easily see it being dropped down to 12,000 yen and end up being at a similar price. So I don't think this is this once-in-a-lifetime deal here, but I do think it is a good value, particularly for what I paid for. So in my case, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. For those interested in this figure, if you were to buy it at Crunchyroll MSRP, I'd give it a 2 out of 5 in value. If you could buy it around Aniplex price of around $120 in value, I'd give that a 3 out of 5. And if you can capture this sales price, definitely a 4 out of 5 in value. So off to a good start with the unboxing of my first scale figure of Marin Kitagawa. And I'll wrap it up by giving the certification that Senpai remains stoic in the presence of this big titty blonde and only slightly notices the plaid skirt and red panties. Senpai is strong, Marin is nothing. Alright, and in my mind, we've saved the best for last here, or at least the one I am most excited for. This is the Marin Kitagawa swimsuit version. This is a collaboration between Aniplex, which we just saw in the last figure, and Claynel, who's the manufacturer of this. Once again, this is a 1/7 scale, and this came out 2 months later in December 2023 for 22,000 yen. And just like the last Aniplex figure, this became a Crunchyroll exclusive, where they're the ones that had exclusive rights to distribute within North America. So the only way to get this at the 22,000 yen would have been to use a proxy. Crunchyroll's MSRP is $197.99. Comparatively, in December 2023, 22,000 yen was worth about $155. So we're seeing a markup similar to what we saw in the last figure. Diving right in, here is a quick look at the box, and the dimensions are in the corner. Then here is a look at the figure itself, also with dimensions on screen. So right off the bat here, I feel far more comfortable with Crunchyroll's near $200 MSRP. When you consider that the last Omniplex was $170, definitely feels like you should spend the extra $30 to splurge on this. Speaking of Crunchyroll, if you're interested in buying this figure brand new, unfortunately it is sold out on their website. Now don't hold me to it, but I believe this figure has sold out and come back before. So if you're lucky, it might reappear again and then maybe hopefully go on sale. Other than that, you will have to import this or get it on the pre-owned market. Believe it or not, you can get this pre-owned from AmiAmi for import for 21,580 yen, which is roughly $143. And by the time you pay for shipping, depending on the speed you're at, you're all over the price of Crunchyroll. And then for what I paid for this via the sale, it was discounted all the way down to $89.99. During this first transaction, I'm unaware if there was an additional coupon code that could have given me further off. But $89.99 is already 54.5% off Crunchyroll's MSRP, and by the time I paid taxes and my free shipping, it only cost me $97.19, which for what I'm seeing here, already feels like a great deal. Very quick visual comparison here. I'm $81 into the first figure, and $98 into the second. This one has a $170 MSRP, and this one a $200 MSRP. Before doing a deep dive to look into the quality of this figure, on the surface level, I'm way more content with both prices for the swimsuit version. $200 USD doesn't feel too far-fetched for this figure, though I think it's a tad expensive, and $97 feels like a great deal. Doing a close-up of the paint, let's go ahead and start with the hair just like last time. We do see the gradient of pink in Marin's hair, so that's always nice to see. I like the evenness of this gradient more than the first, but still wish this was a tad darker. And just as before, we have shading in the part of her hair, and very clean jewelry with painted fingernails. The bikini top itself is dark, so we don't see any shading, but the printwork of the flowers is very crisp. And the amulet itself, reasonably clean. This time around, Marin has shown a lot more skin. The texture is smooth, but there is no shading on the body. As we mentioned before, this is pretty common with female figures because it's going to give them a softer appearance. The face is very similar to last time, albeit we have one eye closed. The decals are set nicely, and we do see blush, and the mouth looks really clean. I do appreciate they added paint for the bottom lip. Then like before, she has all of her normal piercings, and this time around I think they're even more crisp than the last figure. As with her fingernails, her toes are painted. The bikini bottom is the last thing we can even talk about when it comes to paint on Marin, and it's just jet black. When it comes to paint on the base, we see a mix of things. The bag here does have shading, although it's only in the top band of these frills and the bottom band of these frills. Silver accent is clean because it was added later back in. The line work on her polo shirt here is clean, but there actually is no shading at all. But we will see shading and weathering on her denim shorts. The lines on her belt are clean. And here's a view of some of the shading on the back. The comforter and Japanese bedding that we see here does feature quite a bit of shading. These flowers are decals and they are crisp. And we see shading along all the creases here on the sides. The white areas once again seem to be using that technique of spraying the white over a darker blue plastic. As it thins out, those areas get darker. And that same technique is extended to this pillow here. And lastly, the shading on the tatami mats is very simple. We just have it around the edges. In many respects, the paint job here is similar to the first figure that we reviewed. But it does feel like they got lazy. This figure doesn't have any shading on the dark bikini. Yes, it is dark, but so too on the other figure did we get shading on her dark socks. And then we don't have any shading here on the striped shirt. So given what I see here, definitely going to dial it back to just your average scale figure and give it a 3 out of 5. When it comes to sculpt, modeling, and finish, I'm happy to report that I don't have any of those quirky QC issues we saw in the first figure. No additional crust or stains on this one. The top of the head still has sections added back in, but they're significantly tighter, and we don't have any of that paint clumping that fell in the cracks of the last one. This time I think this is the best cultured angle on Marin. Her breasts are large and perky, but I do feel like they've given an appropriate level of sag for the support that the bikini top is giving, so I do think this looks believable. The cleavage in the middle looks good and deep. Sometimes we see buildup of flashing in there on other figures where it looks like the boobs are more melded together. In this case, even on this small of scale, they have ample separation. Then I'm always a sucker for a good stomach sculpt. When looking at her toes, which I'll show you in a second, it led me to notice that that line in the cleavage is actually painted. Because in her toes, which definitely look like little sausages here, we can see that those middle lines are actually painted to give it more separation when I guess they couldn't get rid of that in the modeling. From there, everything else on Marin is pretty standard, so the rest of the modeling is here in the base. They've done a great job of modeling all the wrinkles in the comforter and making it appear soft. This side profile here is one of my favorite views. Shirt itself gets less believable. We don't have any paint to assist that modeling, so the inside of the collar there is not very believable, and the definition of the pockets is also not very believable. For the shorts and belt, I do like how the belt looks coiled, and the shorts have ample enough detail to appear ripped and torn. Unfortunately, on the handle of this bag, we do have a lot of excess flashing here on the front, as well as on the back here, though this is not visible when displayed. So regarding sculpt as a whole, I am impressed with certain details, such as what we see in the base. But as it all sits together, again, we're back to that same level of what I expect for an average scale figure, so it's going to get a 3 out of 5. The base, though, as you might be able to tell, is something that I greatly appreciate. This is a lot more fun, of course, than your average circular base. And it's nice that none of this is affixed. So for example, I can move any of these pieces around, arrange it the way that I like, and the tatami mats are not necessary. So I can easily remove them to try and condense this down to less space. This versatility gives you many ways to display this in your collection. You don't have to accommodate the tatami mats. When it comes to rating, of course, this is significantly more elaborate than your average circular base. It's not quite extreme levels of base for me, but as a diorama, I think this is great. And the versatility allows me to kind of forgive some of the weaker areas such as this shirt, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a 5 out of 5. For artistry, this isn't based on a singular artwork, but rather a scene from the second chapter of the manga and the second episode of the anime. In neither the anime or manga do we see Marin in this exact pose on the bed, but we do get close. Specifically, this scene is as close as we get to this pose, albeit you can see that she's laying down when she gives a peace sign in this orientation. Now, this is the first time she plops down on the bed, so it gives us a chance to also see the room itself. We see the tatami mats, right, because Gojo's house is very traditional. And then you can see her bags and clothes folded in the corner, albeit in the anime, they're actually stacked on top of each other. Specifically, like this. But I do think this was a good choice to give us some more visual appeal here and allow us to arrange more things to our liking. So I do like the creative decisions here, as I feel like it makes for a better figure than directly from the source. So artistically, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. When it comes to value, I think this one's a little easier to discuss. Even on Crunchyroll at the MSRP of $200, I feel that's spot on for what we're getting here. To me, there's enough here to justify $200, and I think this would do really well on our yen per gram score. There's a lot more value here at $200 than the last figure at $170. So I would actually be willing to give this a 3 out of 5 at Crunchyroll's MSRP. And it only gets better when we go to Oniplex's yen cost of 22,000 yen, which at that time was 155 USD. I think that's an excellent value proposition, and we must certainly give it a 4 out of 5. And then if we look at what I got this for on the Crunchyroll sale, $97 for this out the door is an absolutely insane value and worthy of a 5 out of 5. Between the two figures we've looked at today, I definitely see more value in spending more to get more. In all respects, I would choose this figure over the last one. And even in a world where you had to pay full price for this, if you're a Marin Kitagawa fan, I think this is one of her best figures, and I would still be comfortable recommending this at $200, albeit it'd be a 3 out of 5 on the value scale for me. All in all, very pleased with what I paid for it and I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever, so it's going to leave with this certification. Senpai is slightly less stoic in the presence of this big titty blonde in a bikini and 100% most definitely doesn't wish this would happen to him. Senpai is strong, Marin is nothing. And just like that, I suddenly have a My Dress Up Darling display, and all in all for the figures here, I'm only about $200 into it, so I'm very pleased. I do have one more piece to add to this display that I want to share with you all. Yes, I do like My Dress Up Darling, and yes, I still hate Marin, and I'm doing everything I can to keep my distance from her. If you follow our channel, some of you may know that we recently flew to Spain to visit Madrid, and while I was there, I did end up picking up something for this collection. I ended up picking up the first volume, and yes, it is in Spanish, but I picked it up for a reason that I thought was amusing and I couldn't say no to. Strangely enough, for the Spanish release, at least in Europe, the title is still in English. The Japanese title is Sono Bisque Doll, and the English translation is My Dress Up Darling, and amusingly, the Spanish title is simply Sexy Cosplay Doll, which I thought was amusing, had to buy it, so it's going to go in this collection. As usual, I hope this video was informative and that you can take away something from this. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe. I'm Senpai. Take care.